Okay, so we're almost at 5:30. And to make those of you that are here in person aware, we are also recording on YouTube. So there's multiple things going on over here. So as a result, I will be sitting with the computer for the presentation. And we'll go ahead and get started because we're right at 5:30. So I want to thank everyone that's both here in person and online viewing the presentation. Thank you all so much for joining in. Now, while we are live streaming this, it's also going to be recording. So if you run into folks on the street and start talking about important issues and related to comprehensive planning, it'll be important to inform them of the availability of these videos, because we want to be sure to get the information out and get people active and participating, because we're going to talk through a lot of stuff today, and this won't be the only presentation that we give, because each working group put in a lot of time and developed a lot of goals, objectives, and action items. So consider this a brief overview of what we've accomplished so far. So my name is Andrea Pompey-Lacey. I am the planning administrator for the Bourbon County Joint Planning Office. My contact information is here on the slide. You also are more than welcome to visit our website, which is chock full of information. The website is bourboncountyplanning.com. And to make you aware, the Bourbon County Joint Planning Office, it's called Joint because we do serve all of the communities that are within the county, Bourbon County line. So Millersburg, North Middletown, Paris, and the unincorporated county as well. Many of you that are here, I see a lot of folks that have participated in working groups. You're going to see some introductory information that you've already heard about before. But I do want to touch upon the definition of planning, why we do it, and how we do it. So planning provides a vision for the community today, and it starts the conversation about what we want to be in the future. So it gets us thinking along the same wavelength so that we can start getting things done. And we plan for everyone. This is Andrea Pompey-Lacey's The Heart of Planning. The heart of planning is equity. It's making sure that we are serving people regardless of what their background is, their race, ethnicity, social and economic status, and always in a manner that is sustainable to the environment, because without a healthy environment, we're not going to be healthy people. So we plan for good health, both of people, animals, wildlife, the earth, economic well-being for our ability to sustain financially, and for public safety to make sure that our neighborhoods are safe. The other reason why we plan is because we're required to. In the state of Kentucky, KRS 100 addresses comprehensive planning, and so because we have planning and zoning in our community, we are required to conduct a comprehensive planning process every 5 years. And we plan all the time. When we run into each other on the street and we start talking about community issues, we're planning. I mean, we're figuring out what's that next conversation to figure out how we can get to action. Who do we need to approach for policy changes? Well, oftentimes it's the Planning Commission, the Planning Office, your legislative bodies. It could be your nonprofit organizations, charitable bodies, churches. There are all kinds of groups that plan on different levels, and the most important thing in all of this is ensuring that there are open lines of communication and that multi-sector partners are working closely and on a day-to-day basis with one another. In Bourbon County, we have a lot of long-range planning documents. We have our 2017 comprehensive plan, the plan that we're updating, the 2016 hazard mitigation plan, which is a regional plan for the Bluegrass Area Development District. So Bourbon County is one of 18 counties that are part of that plan. And that's addressing natural and man-made hazards, so your flooding, storm, tornado, that sort of thing. The health department has a community health improvement plan. We have a bike and pedestrian plan that has been adopted by our City Commission of Paris and the Fiscal Court. And lastly, we have the Paris Pike Corridor Small Area Plan. And oftentimes small area plans will be for the purpose of establishing special districts. So many of you are aware that the Paris Pike Corridor is a special district and has additional restrictions. So those are just to name a few. And then you've got all those strategic plans that EDA and Chamber and Historic Paris Bourbon County and a multitude of different groups have. And all of those are important for us to reference when we're doing comprehensive planning to make sure that our goals and strategies align. I'm going to show you, you'll notice that in the comprehensive plan documents that you've received so far, and we're all about color coding. So on this wheel here, anything that you see in orange or a peach color is related to community engagement. The blue are the working groups. Purple are the focus groups, and I'm going to talk about each one here in a moment. And then green is the advisory committee and our third-party support that are helping guide and facilitate this plan update process. This timeline here it includes all of those efforts that we've taken on over the past 2 years, which is quite amazing actually when you think about such a small community, how many initiatives we have done to get community input. And I can't emphasize enough that these on-the-table discussions, chalk and talks, all of those events, those community events that you see us at trying to solicit community input, that is where we create the basis for policy decisions. So, you know, the young kid writes on the chalkboard, I want a water park, or I want, you know, I want better sports fields. I want, you know, someplace to hike or play. These are all things that are equally as important as getting a group of adults together in a room and talking about what we think the kids need. So it was very important for us to hear what the youth what their perceptions are. So this is showing you a timeline of what we've done and then what we've still yet to get done. We're halfway through the working group meetings, and then we also have several advisory committee meetings to finish up, and ultimately the legislative bodies will vote on the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, and the final plan will be adopted and voted on by the Planning Commission first and foremost. So that's just to give you a timeline of all we've been doing. And I do see some advisory committee members here. Thank you for joining us. The advisory committee is focused on overseeing the plan update process. So when we make accomplishments during our working groups, we then schedule an advisory committee meeting to go over those accomplishments and for them to look over and possibly revise. There is a good chance that there will be future revisions to a lot of those items that have been drafted up. But those groups are there to help prep the document for submittal to the legislative bodies. At the beginning of the plan update process of this year, we held focus groups, and actually we ended up having these focus groups in North Middletown and Millersburg. And we wanted to make sure in this plan update process that we were focusing on the smaller communities that, let's be honest, get overlooked in discussions oftentimes. So we had some focus groups with community leadership, and I'm going to talk through some of that input. Millersburg, we got together at the Civic Center and we talked about the challenges, the strengths, and some of the identified future actions for the city of Millersburg. And as with many small towns, it was discussed the loss of amenities downtown, the closure of the elementary school, and how much of a detriment that had been to the community. But then we also, as a strength, it was interesting how adaptive reuse of buildings has come into Millersburg. So you've got a new civic center that was formerly the elementary school. And you also have the Millersburg Military Institute that's been converted to a special events venue, to a school campus, and it sounds like a variety of other economic functions as well. And then the arts community, anchored by Artcroft in Millersburg, was mentioned. One thing that was in process when we had our focus group was the rebranding of Millersburg. And so the text up there that says Millersburg established 1817, that was from the rebranding campaign. And as a result, there's a really fantastic website that was developed for the community. Millersburg has gotten excellent press through the Kentucky League of Cities, and there's been articles popping up drawing some attention to the community. So for future actions, marketing came up as one item, downtown revitalization efforts, and striving towards certified local government status, which is a status that can be assigned by the Department of Interior, and essentially it's for preservation purposes, the establishment of a historic district, but most importantly, it opens up the community to grant funds. So we talked quite a bit about grant funding and the ability to raise money to revitalize the downtown. So those are just three of the many items that we talked about. And then North Middletown, in actually almost every working group, we had at least one discussion about after-school childcare and the lack of that type of service. Challenges, substance use disorder came up, but it was emphasized that it's not unique to North Middletown. They're experiencing a lot of the same things that other communities are. Rental housing and absentee landlords, few healthy places to eat. So we did talk about food access. And the broken window syndrome came up. So oftentimes when one broken window sits and is not repaired, then people get used to that, and then that becomes the norm. And as far as strengths, North Middletown is the only rural school left in Bourbon County. So North Middletown does have an elementary school. They talked about the volunteer fire departments, or fire department, churches, and other local gathering places around town. And they recently sold their water utilities to American Water. So There was discussion about the capacity of the North Middletown water treatment facility and the ability for growth in the future. The future actions that were identified were code enforcement. And like I said, with after-school childcare, code enforcement came up time and time again, every single meeting we've been in for our working groups, and the need to really ramp up code enforcement efforts. The farmers market, in connecting folks to fresh food and opening up business opportunities for home producers, walking trails around town, and improving sidewalks around town too, through grant and funding opportunities. So preliminarily, these were some of the discussions that we had in the in North Middletown and Millersburg as the smaller communities in the county. And you'll notice that those action items that were identified in February of this year, they've carried on to the action items that are identified in the plan. So the on the table discussions, the main thing I want to emphasize with this, because I've presented on this multiple times, so many of you are probably familiar with it. Over 40% of the participants of these activities were under the age of 18. So again, we tried to have a focused effort on getting input from youth, whether the children that participated could write properly or not. As long as they could draw a picture, that's a conversation starter. And so for the on the table week, there were also lots of adults that met. 60% were adults, 16 discussions, and 200 participants. So this information has fed into the working groups. And this information is what we are considering as the perspective of the community. So the strengths of the community, natural resources, was one of the biggest items that from that activity. The community facilities, local businesses, schools, history and architecture, the people, the small town vibe, community events, community groups. There's a lot of community that's come up with the strengths here. And then the challenges: housing, infrastructure, aging infrastructure in particular, blighted and vacant properties, the mindset, the need for a cultural shift to occur, economic sustainability, and in particular the ability for businesses to remain open, the ability for families to have jobs to sustain themselves, to be able to afford to live, entertainment and activities, education and training, local businesses, healthcare, drugs, and crime. And then to add to that, Mickey and I, we went to a 5th grade class at North Middletown Elementary School. It was a wonderful time, wasn't it, Mickey? Yeah, and we got to go to the science fair too, which was really cool also.
You judged the science fair?
No, I didn't. I didn't judge, but it was fun. Mm-hmm. So we did some youth engagement with this 5th grade class, and it was a very basic activity. We talked about what are some of your favorite places in your community. Name those places. And then we asked them, name the places that you have to leave your community to go get. And so that was a conversation starter about, what's missing in our community. And then we had them draw pictures of what they consider to be their community. And so some of them drew their farm, the farm that they live on. Some of them drew the block. Some of them drew an entire downtown area that showed the library and other facilities that they might walk to. So it was very interesting to see the scale at which the children viewed what they thought was their community. So that was a really neat event. And this information carried forth into our working groups, and it actually confirmed even what we've been hearing from the adults. What's missing? Well, grocery, well, fun places to go play, entertainment facilities. And the other aspect of the comprehensive planning are going to the people, right? Because we hold meetings and we might get 15 or 20 people to a meeting, and that's a win in our book. But when you go to a community event, you interact with all walks of life, and you're able to gather input that way. And so we did the art walk, the Chautauqua Festival in Millersburg, and this Saturday we're going to be in North Middletown for the Bicentennial Festival. So we're really excited to hear from the North Middletown community and get to know the community a little bit better. And this year for our open house, we are going to have a theme of the comprehensive plan. So we will have some visual posters and things of that sort to share in December. Okay, so before I jump into working groups, some of the additional steps that are going to be taken. So throughout this process, we've reported to the legislative bodies on the progress that we've made. We've reported to the Planning Commission, and we make sure that we're putting the information out there for not just our elected officials and appointed officials, but for the community to view. So we did a couple-page notice in the paper that had it had all of the goals on it, and the progress from the working groups and so forth, and the schedules for the working group meetings. So we've made a point to get information in print advertisement, on the website, on social media, and distributed via email on Nikki's massive email listserv. But the public hearings, so the public hearings that will be for the goals and objectives, those will begin in early 2020 once the working groups have gotten through all of their meetings. So, and then lastly, we can't do the plan update process without third-party support. It's really, I think that contractors are often underappreciated as their role as a neutral perspective when they come into communities, and that's very important to make sure that we're having productive conversations. In CEDIC, the Community and Economic Development Initiative of Kentucky from UK, they've been contracted out to support us and facilitate during this plan update process. And then we've had many maps made by Greenfield Geospatial that will be used in this plan update. So that's the other aspect of comprehensive planning that's important to mention in this process. Okay, now for the color coding madness. So the first stage that we've gone through is housing, economic growth, and public health working groups. The second stage, I'm sorry, it says stage 1 on the bottom, but it should say stage 2. The second stage will begin next week, and that's agriculture and environment, land use, and heritage and urban form. So we've had, on the right-hand side of the slide, it's showing we've had 15 meetings to date. Our total attendance has been 151, but the number, we've had a lot of repeat offenders. We've had a lot of repeat attendees. So we've had 79 that have been attending and participating, and so we're very pleased with that. We're looking forward to continue expanding that engagement, but that's just a snapshot of the participation that we've had so far. In the working groups, their role is to gather information. So at the first meeting, and actually a few of the meetings, we've had special subject matter experts, so to speak, come and talk. At the public health working group meeting, we had Drew Beckett and Andrea Brown come talk about the Bourbon County Health Department and public health and what that means, and to be a primer for future discussion about goals and objectives. Equally so, in the housing group, we had Allison Davis of the University of Kentucky come talk about the housing demand study that was conducted for Bourbon County, so that we could have more refined discussion about housing. So developing the goals, developing the objectives, and the action items, these were the main focuses of these groups. And then where the rubber hits the road is, I guess I didn't put that slide in there, but I'll talk through it. Where the rubber hits the road is how do we categorize these action items that we're coming up with? And so the action items range from policy changes or policy updates that will happen at the local level, education and outreach to make sure that we're informing the community about and just getting them involved, partnership and collaboration among different entities, private, nonprofit, multi-sector initiatives, and marketing and advertising. And so we asked the working groups, as we got into talking about drafting action items, think about it as far as these various categories. Are we talking about an education initiative? Are we talking about an ordinance change that needs to be made by our planning commission and by staff at the local government level? And so those were some of the terms that we introduced to the working groups to consider. Okay, now onto this next one. So what were our methods of decision making among the working groups? Well, we had you all hold your hands up oftentimes, right? And hold up how many fingers you were in agreement with a goal or an objective. And so modified consensus, that was one method that was used to be able to build agreement on the goals and objectives. And so 5 would be, yeah, this is the best idea in the world, and 0 or 1 is it's terrible. And if some people held up 0 or 1, we talked about it and we tried to work through it. So modified consensus was one way, and voting was another way. And so the voting wasn't marrying us to the goals that were voted on. However, it was a way to narrow down what the working groups felt like were the priorities. So up here on the slide, you can see this was for the housing working group, and we asked folks, you've got 3 Post-its. You can put 3 on one goal if you really love the goal, or you can put, 1 on each that you feel like are the top 3. And so as a result, over on the right-hand side of the slide, it shows you the ones that were most popular. And then from there, the groups broke out and started wordsmithing and adjusting it to reflect Bourbon County. So those were 2 of the decision-making mechanisms that we went through. So I'm going to go briefly through through each of the working groups, just to save you the time of reading through the objectives. However, the main themes that were identified for housing were housing diversity, urban redevelopment, and context-sensitive design. So within each goal, the groups created objectives, and those objectives are supposed to be more action-oriented. So I'll read through them briefly. Promoting varieties of housing types and densities based on the local population, changing demographics and market demand, expanding middle-income housing opportunities and integrating new units throughout the community, establishing an information clearinghouse for financial and technical assistance. So clearinghouses came up in every working group. Clearinghouse, we need to create a, one place for folks to go to for information about redeveloping a property or for treatment for substance use disorder. There's a whole range of different clearinghouses that were brought up, and so determining who those partners would be, that's the most important part of making sure that action item gets accomplished. So for example, for redeveloping property, that might be a partnership between the planning office and the economic development authority, and maybe historic Paris Bourbon County to put tax credit, to put the links to tax credit information and the contacts for that. So it's always very important to us when somebody comes to our office to be able to direct them to exactly where they need to go, so that they have, it's never going to be a seamless process, but as much as we can do to make it as smooth as possible is what we're here for. So some of the other objectives are safe, affordable, and accessible housing. The aging community came up every meeting. We have an aging community and we need to get senior housing. Bourbon Heights is full to the brim and the waiting list is years long. So I hear, but there is a shortage of housing for our aging population, and those folks have expressed the desire to stay here and not have to leave Bourbon County. So that is one important aspect of the housing goal. Designing neighborhoods to have convenient and safe multimodal access to jobs, education, and services. And that infrastructure must be planned for in order to provide access to the facility. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate, these are all items that were developed by the working groups. Now, as the process continues on and goes to the advisory committee and then on to the legislative bodies, there very well could be changes made to some of the objectives and action items. So now one thing that did come out of our housing working group in particular, we got to the end of the 5th meeting and we realized, well actually it was before the 5th meeting even started, we realized we're not going to get all of this done that we need to in order for us to have a solid goal and objectives in place. So we're looking to have one more workshop that's just focused on housing design and development. So you'll be informed about a future date for that. But that was one item that we didn't feel like as staff we have a solid enough consensus on. So look for that in the future. Okay, infill and redevelopment. You all have the goals and objectives in front of you, and those of you that are online, the goals and objectives will be posted on there. So I encourage you to read through those in your free time. But infill and redevelopment was an extremely important part of our discussion, and the linkage between code enforcement to the turning over of properties for future reinvestment and revitalization of our neighborhoods. So there were quite a few that were identified as goal number 2. Goal number 3 was providing well-designed neighborhoods while demonstrating sensitivity toward natural resource conservation. And again, this is the area that we feel like we need to get the maps out and take a land use focus on looking at housing. So providing opportunities for more planned unit developments, concepts, and that's including townhomes, condominiums, apartment buildings, as well as commercial centers and workplaces within areas designated for future growth. The second A should be B. Plan for the development of existing rural settlements through the provision of approved sanitary systems and water supply. C, pursue incentives and regulatory approaches that encourage creativity and sustainability in housing development and redevelopment. And then continuing on, making sure that we're incorporating adequate green space into our developments. I guess that was another one that's not on there. Striving for positive and safe social interactions in neighborhoods, for pedestrian access in various modes of transportation, and encouraging energy efficient development practices and resilient design features. So you'll notice there's a lot of redundancy between many of these action items or many of these objectives, and that's okay. We're going to have action items that, it's going to apply to public health plan element and housing plan element, and as a result, we're going to see a boost in the economy. So a lot of these things are they're all related. Everything's interconnected. So I'm just going to share with you some of the action items. There's a lot of action items that were developed, and to be quite honest with you, we're still organizing them in our office. So we're working on tabulating the action items, and when I say that, creating a matrix to show these are the partners that would participate in this. This is what the time frame would be. So we're still working on pulling together the information from the working group sessions, but in the housing meetings, as far as infill development is concerned, there was quite a bit of discussion about land bank programming, the need for better enforcement of rental properties, increasing code enforcement staff capacity to be able to actually enforce the codes that we have, exploring first-time home ownership incentives, developing clearinghouse for financial incentives to encourage investment in Bourbon County, considering neighborhood cleanups and converting vacant lots into alternative uses or shared community spaces. So these were some of the action items that were brought up for infill development in particular. And I will also say that the west side of town has come up in every meeting, and the need for focus on revitalization of that neighborhood. So that's something that we hope to put forth more small area planning efforts toward in the future, but that was definitely a big concern. in our working groups. Economic growth, there were 4 goals, and the core themes were work readiness, growth and diversification, tourism promotion, and neighborhood revitalization. We had 5 meetings, 52 attendees, and we developed 4 goals and many objectives. So again, I'm going to read through the goals in their entirety, and then I'll touch upon some of the objectives, but I'm going to spare you. I don't like to read off slides. And I think, I don't know, with PowerPoints, it's should be brief. But cultivating a vibrant community with a strong education base that promotes a skilled technical workforce that attracts a diverse quality of jobs. So encouraging a variety of cultures, investing in quality of life measures, and policies for equitable distribution of housing, recreation, community facilities. So connectivity is something that came up as allowing us to create a vibrant community. In the codes and regulations that we require of our developments and developers, these are ways for us to be able to direct new developments to being more pedestrian friendly and being more connected to one another. There are a lot of objectives for the first goal. So there's 6 more, and all of them have to do with strengthening efforts to promote job creation. And agritourism and the agricultural economy is obviously of priority for our community. And increasing the resident employment base of Bourbon County. We have more than 50% that out commute, that go to other communities, and figuring out a way that our residents can also work here, and vice versa, that those that are commuting in can also move here if they'd like to. And lastly, let's see here. I think I went backwards. Is it on to 3? Okay. Now, making Bourbon County a place that encourages responsible economic growth and diversification. And so this is focused on business creation. And goal 3 is focused on tourism. So promoting the tourism industry as a vital component of broadening the county's overall economic base. And promoting new and existing businesses, encouraging cooperation and cross-marketing, cross-advertising, and coordinating with regional and state tourism entities. And I'm going to share some examples of the action items for tourism. But the last goal for economic growth was revitalizing the urban core of Millersburg, North Middletown, Paris, and the rural growth areas of Bourbon County. Encouraging the reuse and redevelopment of declining commercial and industrial areas. So one method could be adaptive reuse. Enforcing codes and ordinances to reduce vacancies and dilapidation, coordinating with other downtown organizations to develop an integrated streetscape to increase accessibility in order to attract customers. So if we look at some actions that were discussed, many of these are actually going to be housed with the Tourism Commission. But since this is a community, the comprehensive plan is inclusive of all organizations, many of the actions were, low-hanging fruit, things that the Tourism Commission could do to establish a presence in the smaller communities in town, Millersburg and North Middletown, where currently, there isn't a kiosk there or something for passersby that are from out of town to gather information about other places to frequent in Bourbon County. An app for tours, informational materials. As it pertains to vacant and underutilized spaces, there was discussion about collaborating with, could be HPB, could be the Hopewell Museum, it could be Bobby Shiflett Gallery, those that are able to print and create exhibit spaces or something that draws folks' attention to an exhibit rather than to a vacant space. So those temporary uses of spaces came up. And how do we do that? Well, one way that we can do that is by having a requirement for Main Street businesses or buildings to have visual interest in their front windows. That is oftentimes called a transparency ordinance, and it has to do with signage and downtown spaces. So partnering with some of our industrial establishments to offer tours, promoting water recreation facilities, and wouldn't you know it, we don't have public access to the creek here in Bourbon County. It'd be really great if we could get one. So again, there's a lot of things that are, okay, it's nothing new, we've talked about it time and time again, but it's important for us to document this in a policy document so that those decisions that come later, let's say we have a grant opportunity to install a new dock or a new ramp for water access. If you can tie it to a policy document, that makes it more likely that you will receive those funds. So that's one of the most important aspects of developing plans and policy documents. So public health, there were 4 goals that were created as well. Promote well-being, considering health impacts, educating on substance use disorder, and improving food access. So you've got a wide variety of topics that were talked about here. And so here you're seeing the word sustain, equitable, promoting physical and mental well-being, and these were some of the objectives that were created in the public health working group. And there was a lot of discussion on how do you foster that culture, that internal motivation for giving back to your community. And so there were a few action items that were identified in there on, partnering between employers that are located in the community and the schools to get kids in for community service. And a lot of the things that we did discuss were, in fact, already occurring. But how can we expand upon what's already existing? So also increasing opportunities to access indoor and outdoor recreation opportunities. Goal 2 is considering health impacts in all policy creation. Kind of speaks for itself. And goal 3 is supporting education initiatives on substance use disorder. So we had a lot, this was where a clearinghouse came up again. It'd be really great if we could figure out a central location for someone to go to get help, whether it's for themselves or for somebody else. Having an educational campaign on substance use disorder. Encouraging workplace policies to allow people to effectively recover from substance use disorder, and creating more opportunities for long-term recovery. So this particular goal, this obviously has a physical component to it, right? So in order for people to recover, they go through multiple levels of treatment. And that they have to go to a place to do that, right? So in Bourbon County, we have the Stoner Creek facility, and that is that's over capacity. I mean, they don't have enough beds to serve the need here in our community. So it's really important for us as we move on into our land use working group to start talking about, okay, what zoning districts allow for rehabilitation centers in particular? This term cannot be taboo in our community. It is a big concern that we all have. And so we need to talk about, where does our zoning currently allow for such facilities? Where does it not? Because I think what we'll find is that there are very little areas that this type of use is actually allowable. And so we need to be upfront and honest and real about our discussions on where these types of facilities should go in our community. So you can be looking forward to, that being discussed in the land use working group. But substance use disorder was a very hot topic in our public health group, as well as food access. And, obviously we've got Walmart, Save-A-Lot, our dollar stores that we can get some fresh produce from, and dairy. We also have the farmers market here. But access in particular to fresh food was something that was brought up in increasing the mode of transportation to get to fresh food. So if somebody's on foot, how far are they needing to go to get to that fresh food, if they choose to get the fresh food? And educating on how to obtain and prepare fresh and affordable food. Excuse me. So this was another goal. I'm losing my voice. And these are some of the action items. When we look at the first goal of well-being, we didn't have a clear inventory of volunteer programs that are existing, but that's something we'll continue to build on. But obviously one of the action items is figuring out how to foster a better sense of community here in Bourbon County. Looking at how we can increase urban tree canopy. You can be assured that we'll talk about that more in the agriculture and environment working group. Creating more small pocket parks and space in our downtown area. Increasing the availability of second shift childcare. And a lot of these things, it might just be a private business owner that didn't know previously that Bourbon County needed this, but we've identified it and we're expressing the fact that we need some of these facilities. So that's a lot. The other intent on having these discussions is if you're hearing it from 10 or more people, and then we look into it further, and yes, in fact, we don't have any second shift childcare services here in Bourbon County, then that's an opportunity for a private investor. Encouraging charitable work programs, advocating for indoor smoke-free workplaces. This is an initiative that the health department has had for decades now. And ensuring developments are accessible to public services is something we look at with every development plan. And educating employers and employees to support persons with substance use disorder. So these are the ideas for the action items, and obviously they need more fleshing out, but I wanted to give you a glimpse into some of those ideas that were come up with. And lastly, I do want to talk through some of the next steps and encourage you all to continue participating if there are topic areas that are of interest to you, whether it's preservation and rehabilitation of historic structures, or agriculture and the environment. We'll talk a lot about natural hazards in that group. And then finally land use. And the land use working group is where all of these plan elements come together. And we get the maps out and start looking at, what the, historic development patterns have been, and how do we want that future land use map to look. So you have, those of you that are here, you each have a schedule in your lap. Those of you that are online, our schedule is on our website. It's bourboncountyplanning.com. And as I was saying earlier, we do have a Chalk and Talk community engagement activity. That's this Saturday in North Middletown. Our working groups, they start next week for the second phase. We will have a visioning session in February, and this is where we're going to bring together all of the various working group members to come up with one overarching vision for our community. And then lastly, be looking for public hearing dates, because in 2020, as we get into the year, it'll be the spring, I will start giving presentations to the Planning Commission and the legislative bodies on what we've accomplished. Lastly, I want to draw your attention to our website, bourboncountyplanning.com. Please do visit it. I think you'll find a lot of really interesting information on there. But that's really it. So I'll go ahead and say thank you to you all for coming, and thanks to those of you online that have joined us. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Our office number is area code 859-987-2150. And on our website also, we have all the notes, all the documentation from these meetings that we have so far. And in the future, I'll be doing more refined presentations on each of the plan element areas. So thank you so much.